wine in my glass had gone warm because I'd been holding it for 20 minutes without taking a sip, and across the ballroom my mother was telling 400 people that she was giving my company to my brother. She didn't say it like that, of course. She said it the way she said everything, like a benediction. She stood under the lights at the St. Clair Hotel, the same downtown ballroom where my father had held the firm's 25th anniversary back when I was in middle school, and she lifted a glass and told the room that 50 years was a long time for a family to build something, and that legacy only meant something if you handed it to the right hands. Then she looked at my brother Grant and his fiancée, and the business partner standing just behind them in a suit that cost more than the down payment on my first car, and she said she was naming Grant the new president of the firm and transferring her ownership stake to him effective tonight. The room did exactly what rooms do. It applauded. People I'd known my whole life. Subcontractors. The woman who'd done our payroll for 30 years. The city councilman who pretended he didn't remember the permits he'd slow-walked. They all clapped like this was a wedding instead of a robbery. Grant put his hand to his chest like he was surprised, like he hadn't been planning this for 8 months. His fiancée squeezed his arm, and the partner, the one whose name I'm going to get to, smiled with his whole face except his eyes, because his eyes were already on the folder my mother had set down on the little podium beside her. I didn't clap. I didn't stand up. I just sat at table 9, which is where they'd put me, near the kitchen doors, and I watched my mother give away something that had not legally belonged to her for almost 6 years. Before I tell you how I let them sign it, because I did let them, I want you to understand that. I let every one of them put their name on it. I want to know where you're hearing this from and what time it is where you are right now. Tell me. I'm always curious how far a thing like this travels, because for a long time I thought I was the only person it had ever happened to. My name is Sloane. I'm 31. To my family I'm the quiet one, the middle child, the daughter who does the books, which is how my mother has described my job at every holiday for a decade, no matter how many times I corrected her. What I actually do is restructure companies that are dying. Banks bring me in when a business has stopped breathing on its own, when the debt has gotten ahead of the revenue, and somebody needs to decide what gets cut, what gets sold, what gets saved. I'm good at it. I'm good at it because I learned it the hard way, on our own kitchen table, the year my father died and the firm nearly went under, and nobody in my family wanted to look at the numbers. So let me back up. Because the part where I sat at table 9 and said nothing makes no sense, unless you understand the part nobody clapping in that room understood. My father built that company out of a single pickup truck and a framing crew of 3. Holloway Reed Construction. By the time I was in college, it was the firm that built half the medical office parks and municipal buildings in our corner of Ohio. It wasn't glamorous. It was concrete and steel and bid packages and arguing with inspectors. But it was real, and it was his, and he loved it the way some men love a difficult horse. He died in the spring of my second year out of grad school. Heart attack on a job site, 61 years old. And what we found in the weeks after, what I found, because I was the only one who had opened the binders, was that the firm was about 90 days from collapse. He'd personally guaranteed a construction loan on a speculative project that stalled when the anchor tenant pulled out. There was a forbearance agreement the bank had granted him, out of respect, that was about to expire. There were mechanics liens stacking up. There was a payroll he had been quietly covering out of his own savings to keep his crews from walking, men who'd been with him 20 years. My mother's response to all of this was to grieve beautifully and sign whatever the lawyer put in front of her. My brother's response was to disappear to a wellness retreat in Arizona for 6 weeks. So it was me, at 25, sitting at the kitchen table with the binders, learning in real time what a debt covenant was, what a UCC filing was, what it meant that the bank could call the whole thing due. And here is the thing I have never told any of them. The thing I am telling you first. I bought the company, not the building, not a piece of it, the control of it. I had a little money of my own by then, more than they assumed, because I'd been working at a restructuring shop in Chicago and living like a graduate student, and I had taken the modest inheritance my father left me directly, separate from the estate, in cash, and I'd done the one thing that no one in my family was capable of doing in that moment. I called the bank myself. I sat across from a senior workout officer who was prepared to liquidate us, and I negotiated. I bought the distress loan from the bank at a discount, paid off the worst of the liens, and recapitalized the firm through a holding company I set up. A plain little LLC with a boring name, Cardinal Hollow Holdings. Because the cardinal is the Ohio state bird and my father used to point them out to me when I was small. When the dust settled, Cardinal Hollow owned the controlling membership interest in Holloway Reed Construction. And Cardinal Hollow was me. Just me. I never announced it. That was the deal I made with myself. My mother needed to feel like the matriarch who had saved her husband's company, and I let her have that. Because she had just lost him and I loved her then. Despite everything, the way you love someone whose disappointment in you is the oldest fact of your life. I let her keep the corner office and the title of chairwoman. I structured it so the day-to-day was run by my father's longtime operations chief, a steady man who knew where every bolt in every building was, and I quietly held the strings from a distance, approving the big things, blocking the catastrophes, signing nothing in my own name. For 6 years it worked. The firm came back. We paid off the workout loan 2 years early. The crews stayed. My mother gave speeches at the Chamber of Commerce about resilience. And the whole time she told people I did the books. I tell you all this calmly now, but you should know it cost me. There were Thanksgivings where my brother held court about his latest venture. He's had a tech thing, a crypto thing, a boutique consulting thing, each one funded by a loan my mother co-signed and each one folded inside 18 months. And I sat there with the actual, literal knowledge that the roof over the family's financial life was something I had personally rebuilt. And I said nothing while she patted his hand and said, "Grant just thinks bigger than the rest of us." Bigger. That was always the word for him. I was smart. He was big. So that brings me back to the ballroom and to the man in the expensive suit, the one whose eyes were on the folder. His name was Trevor. Trevor had appeared in my brother's life about a year earlier. The way these men always appear, with a firm handshake and a story about a deal. He called himself a development capital strategist, which as far as I could tell meant he wore good shoes and used the word synergy without irony. He had convinced Grant that the family firm was, in his words, a sleeping asset. All that real estate, all those municipal relationships, just sitting there being run by a tired old construction man and a chairwoman who was, and I'm quoting Trevor here as it got back to me, emotionally attached to the past. The pitch Trevor sold my brother, and the pitch my brother sold our mother, was simple and intoxicating. Bring Trevor's development intoxicating. Bring Trevor's development arm into the firm. Let Grant take the helm. Stop being a humble general contractor and start being a developer. Own the projects instead of just building them. Mother could retire as the beloved founder's widow. Grant would finally be big. It was a beautiful story. I'd heard 100 versions of it sitting across the table from frauds, and I knew exactly what it was the moment I heard it because the math is always the same. A man like Trevor doesn't bring capital to a healthy company. He brings a needle. I started looking. Not in a dramatic way. I'm not a detective. I'm an accountant with controlling interest and the contractual right to see anything I want. And what I did was the most boring thing in the world. I read the subcontractor ledgers. Here's what I found, and I'm going to keep it simple, because the simplicity is the part that made me feel sick. Over the prior 9 months, 3 new subcontractors had been added to 2 of our active municipal projects. They were paid promptly, almost too promptly, ahead of every other vendor. They had clean invoices, proper-looking insurance certificates, the works, and every single one of them was a shell. The mailing addresses were UPS store boxes. The insurance certificates listed a carrier that, when I called, had no record of the policy numbers. The signatures authorizing the payments were Grant's, but the wire instructions had been set up by Trevor, and the money, a little under $300,000 so far, had moved through those shells and out to an entity in Delaware that, when I finally peeled it back, listed Trevor's mother-in-law as its registered agent. It wasn't sophisticated. That's what people don't understand about most fraud. It isn't a heist. It's a slow, dumb leak that works because everyone trusts everyone and nobody reads the ledgers. Trevor was skimming subcontractor payments off public works projects. That's not just stealing from a family company. When the projects are funded with municipal money, that's stealing from the taxpayers of the county. And that is the kind of thing that the Ohio Attorney General's office has an entire division devoted to. So about 5 weeks before the gala, I made a phone call I had been dreading my whole life, and it was not to my mother. I called the woman I'd worked with twice before, a senior investigator in the AG's public corruption unit named Renata Vasquez, the kind of person who listens for 10 minutes without saying anything, and then asks one question that tells you she already understood it better than you did. I gave her what I had. She told me what they'd need to make it stick, and what they could and couldn't do, and she was careful. She was always careful, never to promise me how it would end. Because she said no one can promise that, and anyone who does is lying to you. And then she told me the one thing that changed how I handled the night. She said the cleanest case is the one where the man documents his own intent, where he signs. Now do you see why I let them sign? The gala was Grant's idea, of course. The 50th anniversary, the legacy, the handoff. He wanted it public. He wanted 400 witnesses to watch our mother anoint him, because some part of my brother has always believed that if enough people see a thing, it becomes true. The folder on the podium contained the transfer documents, an assignment of my mother's membership interest to Grant, and alongside it, the operating agreement amendment that would fold Trevor's development arm in as a partner with signing authority over project disbursements, the very disbursements he'd been looting. My mother thought she was giving away her shares. She didn't know they weren't hers to give. The interest she believed was hers had been Cardinal Hollow's for 6 years. What she was actually signing and what she was asking Grant and Trevor to countersign in front of 400 people was a fraudulent transfer of property she did not own, and an agreement handing financial control of a company under active investigation to the man committing the fraud. She found me at table 9 before the dessert plates came out. I knew she would. She has a gift for sensing a wrong note in a room the way a conductor does. She came across the floor in her good navy dress, the one she wears when she wants to look like grief and dignity, and she took my elbow. She has always taken my elbow, never my hand, and she steered me out into the corridor by the coat check, away from the photographers she'd hired. "You're sulking," she said. Not a question. "I can see it from the stage. People can see it." "I'm not sulking, Mom." "Then what is that face?" She gestured at me. At all of me, the way she has my whole life. Like my existence is a slightly disappointing dish, she ordered. "Your brother is finally stepping up. After everything I've done to give him a chance. And you sit there at the back like a storm cloud." I want to tell you I felt rage in that hallway. I didn't. I'd felt the rage years ago on the kitchen floor with the binders. What I felt standing there was something quieter and much colder. The feeling I get in a workout meeting when the other side finally says the thing that ends the negotiation in my favor, without realizing they've said it. "Tell me something," I said. "Why him?" And she gave me the answer. The whole answer. She didn't even hesitate, because in her mind it wasn't a confession. It was a sermon she'd been waiting years to deliver. "Because you don't need it," she said. "Look at you, Sloane. You have your fancy job in your fancy city. You have money, I'm sure, sitting somewhere doing nothing. You've always been able to take care of yourself. Grant can't. Grant needs something to belong to. He needs to be somebody, and your father's company is the only thing left that can make him somebody." Her voice dropped. And this is the part I'll never forget. Because she said it gently, like it was kindness. "You were always the strong one. The strong one doesn't get the inheritance. The strong one gives it up. That's what strength is for." There it is. I'd waited 31 years to hear it said plainly. And there it was. My competence was the reason I was owed nothing. The fact that I had never needed her was proof that I never should have gotten anything from her. And the brother who had failed at everything was entitled to the one thing I had actually saved, precisely because he was incapable of saving it himself. She thought she was being moral. That's the thing that took me years to understand about people like my mother. She wasn't a thief in her own mind. She was a redistributor, a righteous hand correcting an unfair God who had given the wrong child the gift. In her version of the story, I was hoarding, and she was simply taking from the daughter who had plenty to give to the son who had nothing. She reached into the little clutch under her arm and took out a pen, and she held it out to me. A nice pen. She'd thought of everything. After dessert, she said, "You're going to come to the front. You're going to hug your brother. You're going to smile for the photographer, and you're going to witness the signature. Because you're family, and the lawyer says we want family witnesses. And you are going to be happy for him. If you embarrass us tonight in front of all these people, in front of Trevor's family, I will never forgive you. Do you understand me?" I looked at the pen, and I felt, for one last time, the old pull. The little girl who wanted her mother to look at her with something other than that patient, pitying disappointment. I felt how easy it would be to take the pen and smile, and let it happen, and go back to my fancy city and my fancy job, and be the strong one who gives it up. And then I thought about the men, my father's crews. The framer who'd been with us 22 years and was 3 years from a pension, working on a project that Trevor was quietly bleeding dry. I thought about who actually paid, in the end. When a company gets hollowed out by a man in good shoes, it's never the man in the good shoes. "You're right, Mom," I said. I took the pen. My voice was very steady. I've been told it gets steady at exactly the wrong moments. Grant needs this. Let's make it official. Her shoulders came down 2 inches. Relief moved across her face like sun coming out, and she actually smiled at me, a real one, the kind I'd been chasing my whole life, because she thought I had folded. She thought I was still the girl at the kitchen table who signed whatever was put in front of her. "Good," she said, and squeezed my elbow. "Good girl. I knew you'd understand." We walked back in together. I let her hold my arm the whole way to the front. The lawyer was there, and the folder was open, and Grant was glowing, and his fiancée was dabbing at her eyes, and Trevor was standing just close enough to look like family, and just far enough to look modest. The photographer crouched. My mother signed first, with a little flourish, assigning her membership interest to her son. The room made an awe sound. Then the lawyer slid the operating agreement amendment in front of Grant, and here is where I did the only thing that night that I'm not entirely proud of, though I'd do it again. Trevor hesitated. I saw it. He'd been watching me too closely all night. Men like him are always watching for the one person in the room who isn't buying it. And some animal part of him had caught a scent. He looked at the amendment, the one that gave him disbursement authority, the one that was about to put his name on a document tied to projects he'd been stealing from, and his hand stopped over the line, and a single bead of sweat slid down from his hairline, even though the ballroom was cold enough that I'd kept my wrap on. A man who's marrying into a fortune for love doesn't sweat. A man who's signing his way into one sweats. So I helped him. I smiled at him, the warm, encouraging smile I use right before a deal closes in my favor. "Trevor," I said, "just loud enough for the front tables. Congratulations. Genuinely. My family's lucky to have you in it. I let that land. You should sign. Lock it in. Things like this, they have a way of slipping through your fingers if you wait." His shoulders dropped, the same way my mother's had. Greed always overrides instinct in the end. That's the only reliable thing about it. He thought I was the last holdout, giving my blessing. He picked up the pen, found the line, and signed his name to the amendment, granting him control of the disbursements. The lawyer notarized it. The photographer's flash went off. My mother clapped her hands together, sharp and bright, and the room took it as a cue, and the applause started up again. And she lifted her glass and announced, to all 400 people, to the future of Holloway Reed, to her son, the president, and to the wonderful new partner joining the family. "Actually," I said, I didn't say it loudly. "I've learned you don't need to. You say it flat and clear, and you let the wrongness of the tone do the work." And the applause died in about 4 seconds, the way a wave pulls back off the sand before something larger comes in. My mother turned. "Sloane, Sit down. I'm not going to do that, I said. I set my phone on the linen tablecloth, screen up, in the middle of the head table, and I tapped it once. Renata, I said, are you there? The speaker crackled, and a woman's voice came out into the silence of the ballroom, calm and unhurried and utterly without theater, which is the most frightening kind of voice there is. I'm here, Sloane. We've got it. We have visual confirmation of the signature on the amendment. Trevor's face did something I have only seen a few times in my career. The blood goes out of it from the top down, like a window shade being drawn, and what's left is a man doing very fast math and not liking the answer. Who is that? My mother said. Sloane, who is that? That's Renata Vasquez, I said. She's a senior investigator with the Public Corruption Unit at the Ohio Attorney General's office. And Trevor, the document you just signed, in front of 400 witnesses and a notary, that's not a partnership agreement. That's evidence. What are you talking about? My brother's voice cracked on the last word. Grant looked at me, then at Trevor, then at the folder. And for the first time in his life, I watched my brother understand that he was not the smartest person at the table, and never had been. I'm talking about the $300,000, I said, that has moved through 3 fake subcontractors on the Brookline municipal job and the county annex job over the last 9 months. Shells, UPS boxes, phony insurance certs, wired out to a Delaware entity that, Trevor, this is the part I admire, lists your mother-in-law as the registered agent. That's theft from a public works contract. That's wire fraud. And the amendment you just signed gives you formal disbursement authority over the exact accounts you've been looting. You didn't accept a partnership tonight. You documented your intent. You can't. My mother stepped toward the phone, her hand out, and I moved mine over it. Just an inch, just enough. I can, I said. And Mom, you should hear this part standing still, because it matters. The interest you assigned to Grant tonight? It was never yours to assign. You haven't held a controlling stake in this company since the spring after Dad died. I bought the workout loan from Huntington myself. I recapitalized the firm. The controlling member is a holding company called Cardinal Hollow. I let myself say the next part slowly. Cardinal Hollow is me. It has always been me. I've been signing off on the things that kept the lights on for 6 years, while you told everyone I did the books. The ballroom had gone so quiet I could hear the kitchen doors swing behind me. My mother's mouth opened and closed. That's not your father's company. My father's company was 90 days from liquidation, and you signed whatever the lawyer gave you and went to bed, I said. And I kept my voice gentle, because I wasn't trying to wound her, I was just lying. I'm the one who saved it, not Grant. Not you. Me, the strong one. You were right about that part. I was always the strong one. I just got tired of strength, meaning I'm the one who gets nothing. Trevor did the thing they always do. He stood up so fast his chair went over backward, and he grabbed the amendment off the podium and tore it in half, then in quarters, the pieces fluttering onto the tablecloth among the dessert forks. There, he said, breathing hard. It's gone. I never signed anything. You've got nothing. I almost felt sorry for him. I reached into my own clutch and took out the notary's journal, the slim-bound book the lawyer's notary had been logging into all night, the one that recorded every signature with a date, a time, a thumbprint, and a description of the document. You can shred the paper, Trevor, I said. You can't shred a notary log, and you definitely can't shred the wire records, which the AG's office subpoenaed from your bank 11 days ago. I closed the book. The signature was never the point. It was just the bow on top. He looked past me then, toward the doors, and I watched the recognition arrive in his eyes a half second before the rest of the room turned to see what he was seeing. 2 investigators from Renata's office, who'd been waiting in the lobby with the patience of people who have done this many times, came across the ballroom floor. No shouting, no drawn anything, just 2 people in unremarkable suits in the awful slow inevitability of consequences, finally catching up to a man who'd assumed they never would. They read Trevor his rights by the dessert table. The handcuffs made a small, ordinary sound. My brother's fiancée was crying for real now, the kind that isn't pretty, and Grant just sat there with his hands flat on the linen, like a man who'd been told the floor was no longer load-bearing. One of the investigators turned to my mother. "Ma'am," he said, "we're going to need you to come downtown and answer some questions about the transfer documents you executed tonight. You're not under arrest, but you'll want to bring counsel." The room had backed away from us by then. 400 people who'd applauded twice now stood in a loose ring, phones up, recording, and my mother, who had spent her whole life being the most important person at every event she attended, was no longer the founder's widow handing down a legacy. She was tomorrow's story. She knew it. I watched her know it. She turned to me and grabbed my wrist. And for 1 second I thought she might actually hit me. And then I realized she was begging. "Fix this," she said. "Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them I didn't understand. You can do that. You have the power. You said you have the power. Sloane, fix this." I looked at her hand on my wrist, the same hand that had taken my elbow 10,000 times and never once my hand. "I spend my whole career cleaning up after people who steal," I said. "I'm not going to start covering for them at my own family's party." I took her fingers off my wrist, one at a time, not roughly. "You weren't sorry, Mom. You were caught. There's a difference, and I'm finally old enough to know it." I picked up my phone off the table. Renata was still on the line. I told her thank you, and I meant it, and I hung up. I didn't make a speech. I didn't dump the warm wine over anyone's head. I want to tell you I had some perfect parting line. But I didn't, and I'm glad. Because the people who need a perfect parting line are the ones who haven't actually won. I just picked up my wrap off the back of the chair at table 9, and I walked out through the lobby past the coat check, where my mother had handed me the pen, and I gave the valet my ticket, and I stood out in the cold spring air of downtown and waited for my car. She came out after me. Of course she did. First she begged, then she blamed, said I'd planned this, that I'd humiliated the family on purpose, that my father would be ashamed of me. I let her say it. The valet pulled my car around, an ordinary car, because I drive an ordinary car, and I opened the door. "You owe this family," she said behind me, "after everything we gave you." And I stopped, because I wanted to make sure I'd remember saying it. "You never gave me anything," I said. "I gave you 6 years of pretending you had. That's over now." I got in the car. I locked the doors. I could see her in the rear view, getting smaller, her good navy dress bright under the hotel lights, her hands still half raised like she expected me to come back. I didn't go home. I drove to the office instead, the real office, the operations building on the east side that smells like coffee and concrete dust, where my father's old desk still sits in a corner because nobody ever had the heart to move it. I let myself in. I sat down at his desk in the dark for a while. Then I opened my phone and I deleted my mother's number and my brother's, and I blocked them both, and I sat there waiting to feel guilty about it. The guilt didn't come. What came instead was something I hadn't felt since before my father died, something so unfamiliar it took me a minute to put a name to it. It was quiet, not the empty kind, the kind that's yours. For the first time in my whole life, I wasn't bracing for the next thing that was going to be taken from me, or waiting to be told that being strong meant being the one who gave it all away. I sat in my father's chair in his company that I had saved, and for the first time in 31 years, I wasn't waiting for the bill to come. I used to think being the strong one was a curse, that my mother handed Grant everything precisely because she trusted me to survive without it. Sitting in my father's old chair that night, I finally understood the order of things. Nothing in that ballroom happened by accident. Every piece of it grew out of a choice somebody made years earlier, and the choices came due all at once. My mother chose to look away from the binders when my father died. She chose to sign whatever was easy and call it grief. So when the company nearly collapsed, she wasn't the one standing between it and the bank. I was. That single difference, who showed up when the work was ugly and unglamorous, decided who actually owned what 6 years later. She thought ownership was something you announced from a stage. It turned out to be something you earn quietly, at a kitchen table, when no one is clapping. Trevor chose the shortcut. He thought stealing a little off the top of public contracts was smart, because it was simple, and no one was reading the ledgers. But simple is not the same as smart. Real intelligence is patient. It does the boring reading. It calls the insurance carrier to check the policy number. The reason I caught him wasn't that I was clever in some dramatic way. It was that I did the dull, careful thing for weeks while he assumed nobody ever would. He confused getting away with it for being good at it, and those are not the same thing, not ever. And Grant chose to be flattered instead of curious. He wanted to be somebody so badly that he never once asked the obvious question about where Trevor's money really came from. Wanting something is not the same as being ready for it. If there's anything I'd want you to take from what happened to my family, it's that those 3 things, doing right when it costs you, thinking clearly when it would be easier not to, and refusing to quit when the work is hard and thankless, are not separate virtues. They're one rope, braided together. I couldn't have saved the company on integrity alone if I hadn't also done the homework. The homework would have meant nothing if I hadn't had the spine to walk into that bank at 25, and then keep my mouth shut for 6 years until the moment was right. I didn't beat my mother and my brother because I was lucky, or because some scale finally balanced on its own. I beat them because for 6 years, when no one was watching, I kept choosing to be decent, to be careful, and to keep going. That's the whole secret. There isn't a more comforting one. You build the strength quietly, long before the night you need it, and then one day the room goes silent and you find out you already had it.